For the young people of the world, travelling is incredibly popular, often in countries completely foreign to their own. I think travelling to other countries is a great way to shape your experience of humanity, because you'll understand better just how different and unique the world really is. You'll also begin to empathise much more with just how difficult life can be outside of our own developed countries. It offers opportunities to learn new things, experience new cultures, and meet interesting new people. I personally highly recommend it, and I've travelled over some of the world's major continents. But there is a terrifying reality to travelling that we often forget when we travel from our sheltered countries. In countries with people living in poverty, life is cheap, and it's often treated that way. In 2014, 2 Dutch students doing voluntary work in Panama disappeared after going on a local hike. Police found some of their remains scattered over a large area in confusing circumstances, and even more confusing, their possessions were neatly folded inside a backpack in the middle of the jungle. Dutch university students Lisanne Froon and Kris Kremers had met while working in a cafe together in Amersfoort and moved in together shortly after. Lisanne, who'd been studying psychology, was described as thoughtful, intelligent, and shy. Kris was a student of cultural social education. She was often described as extroverted, cheerful, and outspoken. Both girls were avid users of social media and both kept diaries. After finishing their studies for the year, they decided to do some travelling, as young people often do, to take in some foreign culture and learn some Spanish. Lisanne had never travelled farther than Germany, while Kris had fallen in love with South America during a trip to Peru with her family. They decided on visiting Panama and doing some voluntary work in Panamanian schools, even raising some money to buy the children of the school some toys. The girls landed in Bocas del Toro and spent some time learning Spanish, enjoying the food, and generally doing what most tourists do in a foreign country: drinking, dancing, swimming, visiting the beach. When we travel, we tend to subconsciously gravitate towards things and people that are familiar. So when they came across 2 male Dutch travellers, they decided to spend quite a lot of their time in Bocas del Toro with them. They arrived in Boquete, ready to begin their voluntary work at the school, only to find to their disappointment that their plans at the school had been changed, and they hadn't been notified. They now couldn't begin on Monday as planned, despite receiving an email on Friday from the school confirming their appointment. Lisanne was particularly disappointed and sent her parents a text. The girls had arranged to stay with a local host family in Boquete for 4 weeks, a lady called Miriam Guerra, who hosted many international students over the years. Their home for the next 4 weeks had a private room for the girls with its own entrance and key. In interviews, Miriam described the girls as restless, probably due to the recent disappointments at the school. Their first evening in the home was spent separate, as Kris read a book in the bedroom while Lisanne spent time with Miriam. Even with limited Spanish, Lisanne was able to communicate that they needed suggestions as to what to do with their sudden abundance of time. Miriam suggested contacting a different school to see if they could accommodate the girls, but they had already done that. Miriam noted that Lisanne coughed a lot and hadn't been feeling very well. In subsequent days, the girls would be spotted entering the local pharmacy, lending weight to the idea that one of them, probably Lisanne, was a bit unwell. After bringing the girls breakfast, Miriam learned that they had planned to wander around Boquete a little to experience the town and find their surroundings. Photos showed them out and around Boquete on this day, and they returned to Miriam's before sunset. They'd spent the day arranging activities for the next week or so, beginning on Wednesday, April 2nd. This was confirmed by the language school with whom they'd originally booked the trip, as they also helped the girls book the activities. They had planned to view a local coffee plantation, a strawberry farm, and visit the volcano throughout the week. But they didn't make plans for Tuesday, April 1st, because this was the day that they were supposed to start their voluntary work. The Pianista Trail is an 8-kilometer hike, which starts in Boquete and ends at a summit, passing through dense forest jungle and through a cloud forest, which is named as such due to high levels of moisture in the air, which creates a hanging cloud in the area. The hike ends at 6,200 feet above sea level, and the hike itself requires the hiker to ascend 610 meters in altitude in the space of 2 miles. Upon waking, the girls posted on Facebook that they would be walking around Boquete and sent a message to Lisanne's boyfriend Stefan to say that they were going for a hike. Despite the disappointment of the previous days, the girls had been in constant contact with friends and loved ones. They dressed in light clothes fit for a day walking in hot weather and packed a digital camera, 2 mobile phones, 1 passport, some US dollars, a water bottle and a medical insurance card. A taxi then picked them up and took them to the beginning of the local hiking trail known as the Pianista. According to the taxi driver, he dropped them off at 1:40 p.m. This would create confusion when compared with the timestamp on the girls' photographs later, however. Residents at the start of the trail had warned the girls not to take the hike alone, but the girls, after having spoken with the local guide the day before, felt confident that it wouldn't be an issue. Many international travellers visit this area and take this specific hike, and it's not regarded by hiking enthusiasts as being particularly difficult. They seemed cheerful, and they began their day's hike taking a local restaurant's dog named Blue with them. The photographs found on the digital camera in the backpack show 2 young travellers on a hike which they largely seem to enjoy. They are animated, smiling, and together. There is some confusion about the photos because the timestamp on the earliest photo states 6:03 p.m, which was then recalculated by Panamanian investigators to 12:03. This timing conflicts with the taxi driver's story about dropping them off at 1:40 p.m. Investigators decided to recalculate the time by 6 hours under the assumption that the camera was set to the default time zone of Greenwich Mean Time because the camera is manufactured in the UK. But if it was set to default, then why would the date be correct? Photo experts have since looked at the photos of the girls and calculated based on the position of the sun and time of year that the time was around 1 p.m. The girls took a few photos on their journey, each one reflecting the mood of the last. Happy. According to photo number 499, they reached the trail summit at 1:01 p.m. Then, at 4:39 p.m, just hours after they began their short hike, a call was made from Kris's iPhone. The number she dialed was the Dutch Emergency Services number, which when travelling internationally diverts to local emergency services. Almost 10 minutes later, Lisanne's mobile phone also attempted to dial emergency services. Neither calls connected. They then switched their phones off for the next 14 hours. Photos on their digital camera from around this time show a change in the girls. While Lisanne is rarely pictured due to holding the camera, we can see Kris in 2 photos with unusual expressions and body language. Gone is the excited and cheerful posture and expressions of just hours earlier. Most strikingly, every photo now shows the girls separate, and enough distance between them that it makes it difficult to even see the expression on Kris's face. While many of the photos shown before had shown them sharing a selfie together, in every single photo after this point, we would never see them share a selfie again, and we would never see Lisanne again at all. The following morning began a pattern of attempting calls to emergency services twice a day for the next 2 days. There was only one time when the call actually connected, 6:58 a.m. April 2nd, when Lisanne's Samsung connected for approximately 2 seconds and then abruptly disconnected. It's unknown what the reason for disconnection was, but given they were hiking in the jungle, it's very likely it was due to poor network coverage. The phones would periodically be switched on and off between April 3rd, 4 p.m. until April 11th to search for a network connection. They never found one. The tour guide, referred to in the investigation reports as F, was said to have become alarmed that the girls did not meet him for the guided tour that they arranged the day before. He visits a language school at which the girls were supposed to begin volunteering to look for them. He speaks with an employee named Eileen, who says she has not spoken to the girls since the previous day. They both go to Miriam's house to see if the girls are home, but find no signs of anyone being there. Miriam informs F that there is a spare key for the room in the garden, which he retrieves and opens the door to the girls' room. They spend 30 minutes in the room, with neither police nor Miriam present. Two French tourists make their way to the Il Pianista Trail and are told by a local not to enter the jungle because screams had been heard the previous night. Tour guide F begins a search of the area for the missing girls and notifies the police hours later at 5 p.m. Kris's iPhone is switched on and emergency services is dialed. It doesn't connect. This is the last time that a call to emergency services is even attempted. Later in the day, Panamanian authorities begin a large-scale search and rescue for the girls. Mountain specialists are enlisted and the story is broadcast on the news. A helicopter is considered, but weather conditions don't permit. Lisanne's family arrive in Boquete to search for their daughter. Emergency services flies a helicopter over the jungle, which proves ineffective as the jungle is too dense to see anything. Flyers are also handed out to local tribes in the jungle area. 25 mountain search professionals and 20 volunteers continue to comb the area, aided by a helicopter, but high winds and cloud cover again make the helicopters not much use. Lisanne's Samsung is switched on at 4:50 a.m. to check for a signal and again at 5 a.m. Its battery is then empty and it never turns on again. At 10:50 a.m. Kris's iPhone is switched on to check for a signal. At 1:42 p.m. it is switched on to check for a signal again, except this time the incorrect security pin is used so the phone does not unlock. The language school in Boquete offers $2,500 reward for the lead which finds the missing women. This is a very significant sum in Panama. At 10:26 a.m. and 1:37 p.m, Kris's iPhone switches on again to check for signal, but both times the incorrect pin is entered so the phone does not unlock. Panamanian President Ricardo Martinelli goes on live TV to address the issue and assure people his country is doing everything it can to find the girls. Rescuers are now searching areas in which ropes and climbing gear is needed due to dangerous terrain. Around a dozen more attempts at using Kris's iPhone are made, but each time, the incorrect pin is used and the phone remains locked. Chief of the Rescue Services states that his team has extensively searched every zone in which the girls could have been, covering 25 different jungle routes and found no evidence of them whatsoever. He also states at this stage that he feels the girls are not lost, and that it's more likely something else happened. Miriam Guerri also states that she does not think the girls are lost, because they had no plans to take long walks, evidenced by the fact that they didn't pack for a long walk. Conflicting statements are given when residents are interviewed again, with some identifying a red car near the beginning of the trail, and others stating that they saw the girls return from their hike. One local resident, an American, states that the girls came back and asked him how to get back into town and where to get a taxi. All of these leads are ignored by investigators. It's on this night, after 7 days stuck in the jungle with no food, no water, and no hope of escape, that a series of 90 photographs are taken during the night by the girls' camera. Nobody really knows why these photos were taken. Were they trying to use the flash to navigate, signaling rescue helicopters or warding away animals? Were they photographing someone following them? Did the girls even take these photographs at all? Or did someone else take them to give the impression that it was the girls? Whatever was happening, can't even imagine how terrifying it is to be stuck in the jungle for a week with no food and no water. A place where nighttime is absolute pitch black and the sound of teeming wildlife fills the air on all sides like a cacophony of intimidation, slowly closing in and suffocating you. Data released shows that 40 people go missing annually in Panama, with the last missing persons case in Boquete specifically happening in 2009 when Englishman Alex Humphrey went missing while visiting the town. Kris's iPhone is again turned on, and again the wrong codes are entered, leaving the phone locked. Reports state that girls bought large quantities of anti-mosquito products in the pharmacy on the day of their disappearance. Sadly, the CCTV footage which shows this is accidentally deleted. Kris's iPhone is again turned on, again the wrong codes are entered at 10:51 AM. This time it stays on until 11:56 AM, when it's switched off for the last time. Authorities announced that they're stopping search operations and will now change the situation to monitoring. The family increased reward money, stating that they feel a criminal offence took place. A tip is anonymously given that 2 skeletons have been sighted in an area called the culebra, and in the same place where some of the nighttime photos are thought to have been taken. Though we should remember that at this point the backpack hadn't been found, so investigators didn't know about the photos. Bad weather prevents a helicopter from landing in the culebra area to check, but when the helicopter returns 2 days later, investigators find nothing anyway. Betsaida Piti is now leading the team. Her predecessor specialised in rescue, whereas she is a specialist in criminal offences. This leads people to think that the focus has now changed from accidentally lost to foul play. 12 specialist Dutch sniffer dogs, who can track human remains buried in a river for up to 9 months, are allowed to search the area. They spend 9 days searching, but find nothing. A local native woman finds a backpack near a river. It's identified as belonging to the girls. Miraculously, all items inside are intact after spending 2 months in a dense jungle near a river and with constantly changing weather conditions, including heavy rain. Inside are the girls' mobile phones, the digital camera, $83, the girls' bras and sunglasses, and an empty plastic water bottle. After searching the camera, police can now confirm the girls did visit the El Pianista Trail, something they could only postulate before. Officer Piti confirms that human remains have been located by local tour guide F near Rio Culebra. The remains include half of a pelvis, some pieces of tibia and fibula bones, and 2 shoes, one of which does not belong to the girls. Inside the shoe which does belong to the girls is an entire foot. Forensics state that the tightly laced boot could have preserved them this way. All the bones and fragments are found scattered over a fairly large area and are always found by locals. A pair of denim shorts is also found, with some people saying they were found neatly folded on a rock, whilst others said that they were found floating in the river. Forensic analysis confirms the bones of the foot as belonging to Lisanne and the pelvis belonging to Kris. More bones are found by locals. Again, they turn out to belong to the girls. Kremers' Panamanian lawyer files an official complaint against the investigators, stating mishandling of forensic evidence and a weak investigation. Jungle natives find some lower leg bones and a piece of rolled up skin along the Culebra River. It's worth noting that in jungle conditions and after 4 months, skin should have decomposed by now. The skin belongs to Lisanne. Panamanian prosecutor Piti officially states the case as 2 girls lost in the jungle who were killed by accidental falling into the river, whose bodies were then physically smashed against the rocks, causing both death and the breaking up of the bodies. She uses X-ray analysis of the foot, which shows a metatarsal fracture, as the basis for this fall conclusion, also stating that some of the photos at night are taken near a cable bridge over the Culebra River, where some remains were found. The case is officially closed. Now that we're finished with the official story, I thought we'd take a look at the evidence and try and decide what we think is accurate and not. Because after the case was closed and given an official conclusion, a lot of strange details started to come out about the story. The first one being the bones that were found. You see some of the bones belonging to one of the girls. I think the ones belonging to Kris were found stripped and almost bleached according to forensic analysis. That seems strange because they hadn't been there long enough to be bleached by the sun, if they were going to be bleached by the sun. In addition to that, bones are quite porous, so if the bones were found buried, then the bones should have taken on the colour of the things that they were buried in. So bones that are usually dug up from the ground usually have that kind of dirty look to them because the bones have actually absorbed some of the soil and moisture. So if they'd been out in the sunshine, then they shouldn't have been found buried in soil, and they hadn't been there long enough for the sun to bleach them that way. Add to that the fact that the bones recovered from Lisanne still had bits of flesh and skin attached to them. It doesn't make sense that one set of bones would be completely stripped and one set of bones would still have, matter attached to them. Now, your first thought might be that animals probably strip the bones bare. That was my first thought, and that's a reasonable conclusion. But when you look at the police reports, the Dutch police reports, when they analysed the bones, they found no signs that the bones had been gnawed on by animals. There were no teeth marks, no scrapings, nothing. Nothing at all. So it's not animals that strip the bones bare. In addition to that, these bones were supposedly fallen in the river. These two girls fell in the river and they were smashed against the rocks. That's the official police report. But the Dutch analysis didn't find any damage to the bones whatsoever, apart from the broken metatarsal, which we'll come to in a second. And then there's the placement of the bones. You see, some of the bones, the rib, Kris's rib, was found miles north, upstream. Which, I guess you could say that the girls walked north, fell in the river, were smashed about, and then the river pulled their bodies downstream and left some parts upstream. But if that's the case, that begs the question, why were they walking north in the first place? Assuming they fell in the river, even though the river is not very big or powerful this time of year, and that the river is A, strong enough to carry them downstream, and B, violent enough to smash their bodies against the rocks so violently that most of the bones are completely unrecoverable, then why, when the Dutch team examined the bones, did they not find any signs of damage whatsoever? No chips, no scrapes, no cracks. They were in good condition. Then there's the pelvis. Now, a lot of people online have said that the pelvis was snapped in two, but I know a little bit about bones and bone structure, and I don't think that's the case. I think if you look at the picture of the pelvis, what people think of as the pelvis is actually three bones. That's two hip bones, left and right, and then a sacrum which joins them together. There's a couple of other smaller bones, but for the sake of keeping it simple, well, it's three large bones. They're connected by a joint called the sacroiliac joint, which is very hard, very tough, fibrous connective tissue. Now, it is possible, with enough time, exposure to the elements, decomposition, and potentially animals, that the hip bone would naturally come away from the sacrum anyway. So I don't think it isn't, to my slightly more trained eye than the average person, it doesn't look like it's snapped in half to me. It just looks like the hip bone has come away from the sacrum. The foot is a little bit more confusing, or at least how the official report uses the broken foot. See, the official report states that the broken metatarsal is evidence and consistent with death by falling into the river. Except broken metatarsals don't happen when you fall. You can sometimes get a slight abrasion of the fifth metatarsal, which is your little toe, because there is a strong tendon attached to the base of that toe and the ankle. And when you roll your ankle, that tiny little corner gets pulled off because the tendon's too strong. This is referred to as a base of fifth metatarsal fracture. But that's not what we saw in the reports. The reports state that it was a oblique fracture of a middle metatarsal. That doesn't happen with a fall. Metatarsal fractures in the center of the foot happen when you get crushing damage to the top. That's how metatarsal fractures happen. Now, like, hand and feet anatomy isn't all that different. Now, when you fall over onto your hands like this, you don't break the hand. You break where the force stops. So the force hits your hand, travels up to your wrist where it meets resistance, and then your wrist breaks. Or you sometimes get a broken forearm. But more often than not, it's the wrist. The same thing happens with a leg. If you get impact damage to the bottom of your foot, then that force travels up the foot, and to where usually you'll get a fracture on the ankle, or more than likely you'll get a fracture at the bottom of your tibia and fibula bones. Into the bone kind of buckles into what's called a torus fracture. That's what would happen if you had a fall onto your feet. Now, if you rolled your foot, which would be consistent with a fall in my opinion, then you would expect to see a malleolar fracture, which is just at that little bit at the side of your ankles where the balls of your ankles come out. Those tend to break when you roll your ankle. But the report doesn't state that. It states broken metatarsal, which to me is just absolutely inconsistent with an accidental fall hypothesis. Then there's where and how the bones were found, which is incredibly suspicious to me. The official report states that tour guide F found the boot, which is brown, under and behind a tree in the middle of the jungle. There's a couple of explanations for this. Number one, outstanding luck. Number two, superb eyesight. Number three, they were never there in the first place. Number four, he put it there. Now, there's no evidence to suggest which of these four things it is, so I'll let you make up your own mind there. Firstly, the idea that the girls could fall into the river, which is violent enough to smash their bodies to literal pieces, and then the backpack and all the electronics inside would be perfectly fine, seems preposterous to me. I just cannot see that happening. I dare you to put a digital camera in a non-waterproof backpack, throw it in the river, pull it out again. I guarantee you the camera won't work afterwards. And then, you know, even if that unlikely circumstance did happen, the backpack was still sat in the jungle, exposed to rain, mud, sunshine. You know, hundreds of people had walked past it while they were searching. No one saw it, and the contents were unaffected by the weather or the wildlife. And it's also noted in reports that photo number 509 was deleted. Now, they say it was deleted by computer, and the way that you can tell this is that there was still partial data left over, which when you delete something off a memory card, there's always partial data left over, which can be recovered with special software. The only time it can't be recovered with special software is if special software was used to delete it in the first place. So the fact they couldn't recover the picture but they knew it was there suggests that someone deleted it by computer. A detail that I find interesting that I don't think anybody else has talked about is the fact that 509 exists at all. You see, on this particular kind of camera, the way it numbers photos is if I was for example to take photo number 509 and then delete it, when I take my next photo, it automatically becomes 509. The camera treats it as though the original 509 never existed. So the fact that there is a 509 with partial data that comes before 510 says that that photo was deleted after 510 was taken. That is suspicious to me. Yeah, and this all adds up to intentional actions. You know, this isn't consistent with an accident at all. Someone intentionally deleted that photo. Could have been the girls, but it's not very likely given the evidence that we have at hand. And in addition to that, why would they go through the camera and delete one photograph? Surely they'd just delete all of them, or none of them. That's if you wanted to delete them at all, because I can't think that if you're in the jungle for 7 days with no food or water, terrified out of your mind, the last thing you're going to be doing is deleting the photos that you don't like. Then there's the photos themselves. The early photos show them, happy, together. And then after about 505, I think, there's a couple of photos that are a bit unusual. One of which shows Kris in a position which a lot of people online have interpreted as having her hands tied behind her back. After messing about with Photoshop and to bring up some of the details that were either blown out or missing, I don't think that's the case. I think this is Kris bending down with her ear cupped to the floor as though she's listening for something. I think she's just messing about. I don't think there's anything sinister. In fact, I don't think that there is anything sinister in any of the photographs, really. The only strange thing that I thought was different is the sudden change in the distance between the girls. Like originally they were always together, even the photos where Lisanne's photographing Kris, she's never really that far ahead. But then in the later photos, there's a huge distance between them. But even that in itself has a reasonable explanation. It could just be that the camera was set to the widest lens, which I think is 25mm for this particular camera, which would make objects appear to be further away than they really are, in the same way that a long lens makes them seem much closer. And then there's Kris's expression. It's hard for me to tell on Kris's expression because to me, trying to be as unbiased and as objective as possible, I think the expression she has is neutral. But I think it is easy to interpret it as worried or concerned or even scared. But I think that's the effect of the story is having on us, because neutral expressions are often interpreted by our own feelings. Repeated studies show that when we look at neutral photos, usually how we're feeling at that given moment makes us project an expression onto a neutral expression. So it could just be that, because it is a very affecting story. Before I talk about the nighttime photos, I think it's important to discuss the psychology and mindset of people who get lost, just because it'll help us to explain some of their actions. So in preparation for this video, I spent some time on hiking message boards, asking people who do this all the time what their thought process was if they get lost. Almost unanimously, everybody agreed that in the modern age, the first thing you would do is start to document where you'd been and where you are right now, to help try and give yourself a sense of your surroundings and get your bearings. So people said that they would, write it down, or they would take photographs, or ideally, they would shoot video. This way they would know where they've been, where they are now, and where they could possibly go next. Even people who were unfortunately stuck in the Twin Towers when they were hit with the planes left messages for loved ones and relatives on their phones. They sent them in video, text, audio. So the fact that Kris and Lisanne did nothing is so unusual to me. Now, when you get lost, it is very easy to start to panic. And Panic is pretty much the enemy of logic. You know, when you're panicking, you really don't think logically, you make all kinds of bad decisions. In fact, when you train to be an emergency services responder, or when you go to the army, one of the first things that they train out of you is panic. You know, they train you to master and control it. Because when we panic, you know, there are some physiological changes that can affect the way that we behave. You know, your heart starts to race, you get a shot of adrenaline, you'll feel sick, you'll sweat, you can get chest pains, you can feel dizzy and faint. And then there's psychological effects that come with all those things too. So you can feel disoriented, you can feel as if your decision making is compromised, you can feel an intense feeling of helplessness. It's not unreasonable to think that any of these things could have led to the girl's situation. While the nighttime photos are random at first, I do think there's a reasonable explanation for the photographs. Some people online have suggested that the girls were trying to use the camera flash to see where they were going. As a person who once got lost in the woods at night trying to photograph nighttime wildlife, I can tell you that they probably weren't doing that. You see, just like them, I was lost and I had a camera with a flash, and just like the people online, I thought that I could use the flash to find my way around. But I quickly found that you just can't do that. You see, the flash is so bright, and away from the lights of civilization, we often forget just how utterly pitch black and unforgiving the nighttime is in a wild area. And so when you use the flash, the sudden and extreme contrast between light and dark just blinds you temporarily, and it actually makes your eyes unadjusted to the dark. So it's counterproductive to use the flash to see where you're going. But what I did learn was that if you take a photograph using the flash and then look at the photograph, using the photo is a pretty good way to have a vague idea of your surroundings. And I think that's what the girls were probably doing. See, if you look at a lot of the photos, they're photographs of rocky terrain and it looks close to a cliff edge. I think it's pretty reasonable to assume that they were using the camera in the same way I did to try and photograph what looked to be some dangerous terrain. The only one that I couldn't explain was the photo of the back of Kris's head. I can't think of any logical reason why anyone would take this photograph. But then, after a week lost in the jungle with no food or water, I'm not sure any of my decisions would be logical. The missing photo is impossible to ignore, especially when you take into account that it is being done by a computer and it's been done after the other photographs were taken. You know, this could be the missing link between the last normal photograph and the first nighttime photograph that tells us what happened. And sadly, we're never going to know. I don't think it's very likely that their attacker, if there was an attacker, had the capacity in the middle of the jungle and a computer to delete that photograph. So what I think is more likely is that when the camera went into police custody, the photo was deleted at that point. The reason I don't know. It could have been a genuine accident because tech accidents happen all the time. It could also have been that the photo had incriminating evidence of a violent crime which would have damaged the local Panamanian tourism. And so the police deleted it to stop that. That is just conjecture on my part though. The piece of rolled up skin was one of the more gruesome details of the story. And I'll be honest, when I got to that part, I actually stopped reading because I was about to go to bed and I didn't want to give myself nightmares. And so I stopped reading. But when that detail happens months after the girls go missing, you have to ask questions because skin is the first thing to decompose. Now, finding that piece of skin in relatively good condition, not decomposed, months after they went missing, suggests that actually Lisanne must have died much later than Kris. Or she died at the same time as Kris, and her body was stored somewhere, and the skin was placed in the jungle later. Now, I've already spoken about the camera and the photos, but the bras initially confused me. I couldn't understand why the bras were neatly folded inside the backpack, because my first thought was, as anyone might have thought, that probably a third party took them off when things were done to the girls. But then why would they fold them up and place them inside the backpack? That made no sense to me. The more I thought about it, the more I eventually came to an answer that I think is satisfactory. I think that sometime before the girls realised they were in trouble, they probably went for a swim and took off the bras while they were swimming. This makes far more sense to me, since folding them up and putting them neatly inside a backpack is something that two girls on holiday would do. It's not something that an attacker would do after having ripped them off them or after having told them to remove them. I can't see any type of attacker doing that. It makes no sense. The jean shorts were a bit weird too. See, the official police report states that they were found neatly folded on a rock next to the river. Which, okay, that's the story you want to go with. It doesn't make any sense then. If the girls fell into the river and died in the river, how did the shorts get folded neatly on a rock? And if you're going to say that the girl took it off herself, the backpack and most of the parts of the girls were found more than 2 kilometers north of where the jean shorts were found. So are we really to believe that Kris took off her jean shorts, then walked a few kilometers in the dense jungle, teeming with wildlife, in her underwear? No. That's why I think that the original story, the actual eyewitness testimony that they were found floating in the river, makes more sense if you're going to go with the idea that the girls fell and drowned by accident. If that's your official theory, I don't know why you would say they were folded on a rock. It just doesn't make sense. All of these odd details and conflicting information, everything from the odd and sparse placement of the remains, the highly unusual and contradictory state of decay of the remains, the jean shorts, the missing data on the camera, the fact that a fall would not cause a metatarsal fracture, and the completely dry and undamaged contents of a backpack that has been in the jungle for months, all suggest to me that the official report was wrong. These girls did not get lost. All of the things which refuted the lost accident theory are the same things which support the idea that the girls were abducted, including a question which bothered me right from the very beginning. Why did the girls keep going north? To me, and to all the people I spoke to, the first thing you do when you get lost is retrace your steps. The path is fairly clearly marked. So why wouldn't you go backwards towards the path and then just find your way back to Boquete? The only reason I can think of why someone wouldn't do this is if they couldn't, because something or someone was preventing it. It was suggested by a lot of people online that maybe it was drug cartels or gangs, because this particular corner of the world does have a thriving trade in human sex trafficking and involuntary organ donation. So I did a bit of digging and looked around for reports of similar occurrences to these two girls to see if there was any kind of pattern. What I did find was that in 2014 alone there were 51 disappearances around this area, and in 2017 a German woman was lost in the exact same stretch of jungle, and she was found by 3 members of a search party who then kidnapped her and hid her in a hut in the jungle and raped her. They managed to hide her from the other rescue searchers for 3 days. The only reason she escaped was that she cut one of them so badly with a piece of broken bottle that they had to rush him to hospital, and she managed to escape. Despite finding a large amount of cases similar to this one. I didn't find anything related to organ theft or sex trafficking in this particular area. Which, of course, kind of makes sense, because if it was organized crime, then why leave the girls' possessions there? And why let them use their mobile phones every day? I think the crime is a bit more personal in nature and not something as random as chance organ theft. I can't think of a single reason why any gang or organized crime would leave the possessions. That doesn't make sense to me. They just steal it. In addition to that, I think that gangs and organized crime in this area of the world would probably be much better at hiding their evidence, or they'd be powerful enough that they wouldn't have to worry about it. I think this is the work of individuals, or an individual, a local individual. See, a local might start to get scared that they were going to be caught when, the dogs are brought in and the case hits national and international news. A local might worry about that and start to plant evidence to confuse the investigators. So the abduction theory makes more sense, but it still doesn't explain why the girls were allowed to use their mobile phones. A lot of people on the internet seem to think that the phone calls and the photographs weren't taken by the girls, they were taken by whoever attacked the girls. Which I guess makes sense, because it would explain why all the photos apart from one didn't show the girls at all. But I do think that that's a lot of work for a kidnapper to engage in over such an extended period of time. So I don't think that's likely. Here's what I think happened. I think the girls went up the trail and at some point, just after they reached the summit, realized that they were being followed. This would make sense, since the day before they spoke to tour guide F about this exact hike, and the taxi driver dropped them off at that exact hike. So that's two people who knew where they were. This would also explain why they didn't just turn around and go back the way they came. I think that they were pushing further into the jungle to try and get away from whoever it was that was pursuing them, hiding sporadically to try and call for help or try and signal for help and try and lose their attacker. That explains why they were still using the mobile phones a week after going missing. I imagine that after a week in the jungle, their attacker caught up with the dehydrated and starving girls. The rest isn't really something that I want to imagine. So my first thought when it comes to suspects was the taxi driver. Some eyewitnesses say that when the girls got into the taxi, there were two other Panamanian men inside the taxi, as well as the driver. I couldn't verify that, so for sake of not being able to personally verify it, I'm going to discard that information and just work off the idea that the girls were there with the taxi driver. What we do know is no matter which timeline you use, the taxi driver's story doesn't match up with that timeline. Taxis can be dangerous places in South America. I have a friend who lived in Colombia for a while in the late 80s. He spoke perfect Spanish and he's a big guy. He's like 6'5", probably 15 or 16 stone. Normally you'd think he'd be totally fine. But he told me a story once, right before I visited South America myself, of a time when he got into a taxi in Colombia. The driver locked the doors and started to drive him to a local gang who would then hold him for ransom until his family paid up. He only managed to get away when the car stopped at lights and he kicked the window through and then dived out the taxi and ran off. Taxis can be dangerous. When I visited South America, I was very aware of this because of that story and because I was traveling alone. My tip, if you're ever in this area of the world or even any other area of the world where life can be pretty cheap, is if you get into a taxi, don't do it alone. If you're traveling alone, then get a photograph of the taxi driver's ID before you get in the cab and send it to someone that you trust. And then if you go missing and if this person has ill intent towards you, there'll be a starting point for whoever comes looking. So, when the taxi driver's information looked like it didn't make much sense and seemed to be faulty, my first thought was that it was him. He did it. He knew where they were. He had opportunity. He might have had motive, we don't know. But when I looked into his background, pretty much everybody spoke very highly of him. Everybody liked him. They generally spoke of him like he was a very gentle kind of guy, very polite. For one thing. For two, he was found dead a year later. Cause of death was officially stated as drowning, despite the fact he was found face down in a shallow puddle. The only other suspect then is the tour guide, F. And when I looked into his background, he runs a completely above board tourist operation with over 40 5-star reviews. So his background looks okay, to be honest. He knows the jungle really well. He has a coffee farm in the middle of the jungle, which he often takes international travelers to taste his coffee and just explore. That coffee farm is right in the middle of the jungle, which the girls went missing in. And there is a slight catch with the reviews. All the reviews, apart from one, are mixed couples or mixed gender groups. I only found one review from a solo female traveler, and her review was not good. Now we should remember this is just one negative review in a sea of positive reviews. But still, it is incredibly worrying that a solo female traveller would report such a negative and frightening experience with this tour guide. When I read this review for the first time, for some reason I was reminded of the German tourist who got lost and then was kidnapped and abused by people who were supposed to rescue her. And it got me thinking, Tour Guide F has a coffee farm in the middle of the jungle, which the girls went missing in. He does have intimate knowledge of the surrounding area. There is at least one account of him being sexually aggressive with female travelers. In addition to that, he spoke with the girls the day before about the very same trail that they went missing on. A story which he himself confirms in his own official eyewitness account. He was also in the girls' room for 30 minutes. This is his testimony. He was in there for 30 minutes with no police present. And then he didn't notify the police until hours later. This seemed very suspicious to me because if you're so worried about the girls going missing that you feel the need to hunt around town for them, to visit their place of work, to then visit their home and get the spare key and look inside, why wouldn't you report it to the police immediately? Then there's the bones. The bones were mostly found by him. The backpack was found by one of his assistants. In the middle of the jungle for 2 months, and it was clean and dry. The truth is, he was never really considered as a suspect, and he often gave up large chunks of his free time to go looking for the girls in truly terrible weather conditions. Everybody apart from one person gives glowing accounts of both his business and his character, but he did have knowledge of where they were. He is said to have an obsession with Northern European women, and he does carry around a huge machete and jokingly threatens to chop off your legs if you refuse him. Maybe F did follow the girls into the jungle so that he could commit horrible acts upon them. Maybe he deleted the missing photo because it's a photo of him. Maybe the police deleted the photo because it was hard evidence of a violent crime and they didn't want to damage Panamanian tourism. Maybe the girls really did just get lost. Maybe they really did fall and die in accidental circumstances. The truth is, we'll never know the full story. The truth is that whatever end these two young, hopeful travelers met deep in the Panamanian jungle, it was the most harrowing and terrifying experience of their lives. I'd like to thank you for joining me for this Halloween episode. I hope this has been interesting and intriguing, and I hope that you'll all share your thoughts in the comment section below. Thank you for watching.